You found the skeleton. How would you tell people that? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on this.
Hey everybody, so I wasn't originally planning on streaming today, but then I felt like, it's been a while since I streamed on a Saturday, and I usually stream on Saturday so that people outside of, like, the US and places like Europe can get to watch. And also I feel like, my patrons and stuff, they're giving me money for content, and I want to make sure that they have content. So, oh, and Quinn, thank you for joining the channel. Thank you very much, everybody. So, that's a reminder. If you guys want to, you can join the channel. It starts at $1.99, and I think the highest tier is like $10 or something. It's per month. You'll get access to the emojis. Also, Quinn, let me know in a comment, find me on Twitter or email me or something, and I will get you a link to join the Discord server for channel members and patrons. So thank you very much. So originally I was going to do some, maybe do some speculative evolution, art for the speculative evolution project, and then I started doing some, art just to warm up today, and it was terrible. And so I realized I have to do something else. So I found the Spirit Science Human History video, all compiled into 1 hour-long thing. So yeah, that's pretty crazy, and yes, please do hit the like button. And we're gonna jump into this. There might be someone joining later, I don't know. It was very last minute, so I don't expect anyone to hop in, but a few people do have the link, so you never know. Oh, and Hecate likes the pixelation on my Pixel Dapper, thank you. That was done in Blender with some fancy node stuff, so. Here we go. Let's open this up. And hopefully, it should,
Over the last few
There it
thousand
is.
years, we have warped
Awesome.
our own history. Our stories of the past have been changed, altered, mistranslated, and completely been misunderstood as we rounded the curve on the precession of the equinox.
What? Okay, I'm gonna need to see some citations on that one. So it is true that sort of at the beginning of what we see as recorded history about 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, that the precession of the equinox is actually a pretty significant thing in terms of what stars people were seeing at the time, and that created all sorts of stuff going from Taurus into Leo into Pisces and Aquarius and all this stuff, right? But there's no evidence of any twisting of history. Who would even be able to do that? There's no one who's in charge of writing down history for the world. So yeah, good luck, Jordan.
Modern views of our history account for many things, but completely dismiss many very important pieces in the puzzle. For example, the pyramids of Giza.
They're not, the pyramids of Giza aren't dismissed. They're just pretty obviously tombs, and they're not very interesting other than that. I mean, they're big. That's it. If the pyramids of Giza weren't as big as they are, they just wouldn't be interesting. They're not that mysterious. Now, do we know exactly how they were built? No. That's the mysterious part, is exactly how. But we know multiple methods that would have allowed people with the technology available to early Egyptians, which is basically cattle-drawn sleds, log rollers, and copper saws and chisels, to make all of this. It's really not exactly a mystery.
No modern theory that accounts for how these could have been made. Individually, each block cannot be pulled even with 50 men pulling it.
Yeah, you're right. It cannot be pulled across the ground with ropes, like you saw in the Charlton Heston movie, The Ten Commandments. But even in that, they were using grease to lubricate the area they were pulling the blocks. A combination of lubrication, wooden sleds, and log rollers, as well as, they had oxen to drag things, makes this perfectly explainable. In fact, you don't even need to use grease to lubricate sleds. So now the ancient Egyptians at the time of the pyramids didn't really have wheels. Wheels really weren't introduced to Egypt until the chariot, which was a sort of a late Bronze Age, early Iron Age addition to the technology of ancient Egypt, and that is before the pyramids. And so they definitely didn't have wheels, but what they did have, and what we have art of, is animal-drawn sleighs or sleds, right? So you have these wooden runners that go under, and then you can use water to lubricate the dirt or sand or whatever you're running it across. And yeah, I mean, you're going to have to change out the little wooden bottoms of this pretty frequently because it's going to be a high friction thing, but it's going to be lower friction than just dragging the rock, and it gives you more places to secure ropes, and you can attach multiple oxen to it. So yeah, I mean, true, you couldn't use a bunch of guys with ropes and nothing else to drag these blocks. I agree. It's a good thing we know that that's not how they got made, how the pyramids got made. And no, we're not going to get through this whole thing, by the way. It's way too long.
Let alone drag it for hundreds of miles and then stack them on top of each other 450 feet in the air.
Okay, so I'm going to have to stop this every few seconds. Hold on a second, I need to take a drink. So we do know that the quarries for the pyramids were several hundred miles away, but they were several hundred miles upstream on the Nile. So they weren't dragged hundreds of miles. They were loaded onto boats, loaded down the Nile, and then the boats themselves were actually dragged back up the Nile by animals on the shore. And we know, actually, the pyramids of Giza were originally built on the Nile. We actually have ancient docks there. And the thing is, the Nile shifts its course, and in the several thousand years since, the Nile is now pretty far away from the Giza Plateau. But at the time they were being built, it was right there. They didn't have to drag these blocks hundreds of miles. They had to drag them hundreds of feet to get to the base of the pyramid. This is just, from step one, Jordan is getting the very basics of the pyramid's construction wrong. I don't know why. Well, of course I do know why. It's because if he makes it even harder than it was, then it's easier for him to just pretend it was aliens or space gods or whatever it is.
In such a precise way that even modern technology can't achieve. Not to mention having a...
No, modern technology absolutely could achieve this. We have cranes that are big enough. We have measurement instruments that can hold those levels well enough. And really all that's needed to get those angles correct is carpenter squares and plumb bobs. It's really not like... It's a great feat of organization, and I'm sure it took a lot of work, and we have, actual villages where the workers were housed and fed, and, that was a huge project. But it's not some mysterious, impossible thing that we couldn't replicate.
lined up precisely with both Orion's belt, a golden mean, and Fibonacci spiral, and...
It doesn't really line up with those things, though. The thing is, all of those things, as he was showing, are things that are sort of like on-ish a line, which is like, okay, that's great. They kind of line up with a slight curve. Not exactly remarkable. Yeah.
Be a primary nodal point of every sacred site on the planet.
Okay, so the pyramids are a primary nodal site of every sacred point on the planet. Tell you what, Jordan, when you tell me what that means, I will take that seriously. Until then, that was just a load of nonsense. How do you verify that? What are the primary sacred sites on the planet? And do you get this nodal grid by just drawing lines between them? Because if you can do that, then yeah, of course they're going to line up. Because you drew the lines. What is even happening with this?
And that's just one example. Our history is not what we think. Many things that we've been led to believe to be true simply is not. This has got to be the
It's R not, Jordan, but that's okay.
biggest. The field of archaeology recently saw some monumental discoveries that are rocking the foundation of what we think we know about ourselves.
Okay, so this is a thing that I hate in mostly science reporting, but it comes up in like history and archaeology and stuff like that, is you always get these headline grabbing things where like, oh, new discovery overturns everything we thought we knew about human evolution or ancient Egyptian society or something. And what it actually is like, no, this is perfectly in line with what we were expecting. We just didn't have confirmation on this point. Or it slightly modified this hypothesis that you've never heard of anyway. Yeah, that's all that these headlines ever really mean. It's essentially unheard of nowadays for everything about any science to be completely overturned, because at this point we have so much evidence for every area of science, and we've been testing it for so long that yeah, the only likely thing I'm going to say that might get overturned or radically changed is if we can figure out quantum gravity. It's going to have to significantly alter either special relativity or the standard model of quantum physics, or both. But until then, yeah, not much is going to get radically overturned.
Many ancient cities such as Babylon, Erech, and Akkad that were written about in the Bible and other ancient texts were always thought to be myths because no one could prove they existed.
That's not entirely true. So, first of all, Babylon was never really thought to be a wreck because there's a modern city just outside of the actual well-known ruins of it. But the thing is that if you're reading an ancient book and they're talking about ancient cities contemporaneous to the authors, chances are they're not just making it up, because then what would be the point of the book? So there were times at which, the identity of certain cities was unknown. It wasn't sure if a few of them may have been real or not. But the idea that just all of the place names in the Bible were at some point just thought to be just pretend, not really. Yeah, now there are other ancient works that were thought at some point to just be basically mytho-history with no real basis, like the Iliad. Like, for a while, scholarship was just like, there probably wasn't a Troy. But then it got found. So, but yeah, it's not exactly surprising that ancient texts would mention real places in the ancient world. It's sort of like, if you looked at a text written in, 1982, you wouldn't be surprised if it mentioned New York City. Because that's a place that existed in 1982, so why wouldn't it?
Then, one of them was found. This led to finding another, and then another. Inside one of these cities, archaeologists found thousands of cylindrical clay tablets hidden deep within the earth under this ancient city. The tablets were completely covered in text, written in...
Note that this isn't a cylinder. Okay, so what this is, actually, you can actually tell. This is a receipt for wheat or barley, and you can tell because it actually has drawings of wheat, and then these are Sumerian numerals around it. So on the other side yes, even says administrative tablet with cylinder seal impression. So the cylinder seal impression is along the bottom, right? It's this pattern you can get. There's a plant on the far left, there's an animal on the right. And you make the cylinder seal impression, but you carve a cylinder out of rock, not clay. The cylinders are rock. Then you roll it across the wet clay as sort of like an official seal or something. And then on the front here, you can see all these little... they're basically doing math. And likely on the back is a signature and a sum. And so I don't actually read Sumerian. Well, I can read a tiny, tiny, tiny bit, but essentially I don't read Sumerian. So I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are here, but yeah, this is just an accounting tool. This isn't some kind of mystery of the universe. This is saying some farmer paid this much in wheat in taxes.
In cuneiform, and tell an ancient story that spans back over hundreds of thousands of years on this planet.
It would have been nice, Jordan, if that was what you had shown us, or at least something that could be that we could pretend was that, right? Because that was obviously a sum from an early Sumerian tax collector, or it was possibly a contract written between two people, one who was buying and one selling wheat. But yeah, there's no chance that was telling us the epic 500,000 year history of Earth.
Describing the history of the Earth and the origins of the human race in great detail. Now, the first thing we all want to do is just say that they were making things up. They didn't know the history of Earth, and they were simply creating tales to explain where they came from.
No. I'm not saying that what you're talking about, Jordan, is that they were making things up. What I'm saying is that you and your sources are making things up about things that the Sumerians never said. And then separately, the Sumerians were making stuff up. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're also making things up, Jordan.
However, if this was true, how can we explain how they knew so many things about the universe that would seem impossible to know?
They didn't.
Not only did the Dogons know all about the distant planets in the solar system, but...
Nope, they didn't. So this is an interesting story. Back, I'm not sure when, but it was around the mid-20th century. I wish I could remember off the top of my head. But some anthropologists went to the Dogons, and there was this report that they pointed to Sirius and talked about, stars around Sirius and all sorts of stuff that there's no reasonable way that they would know. Okay, well, every subsequent visit to the Dogon in Africa by anthropologists have failed to find any evidence that they ever knew anything about the sky or the universe that they wouldn't have known just from looking up. No ideas about distant planets, exoplanets, none of this stuff. It's basically just an anthropology tall tale. It's not a thing.
So did the Sumerians.
Nope.
They described them all in great detail in these Sumerian records.
No, they didn't. And again, I'm pretty sure this is just another counting tablet, mostly because this isn't actually blocks of text. Although, I do see the sign for star, so it probably does have... It actually might have some astronomical significance. But yeah, there's no evidence the Sumerians knew a whole lot about the solar system.
They also knew about the precession of the equinox.
Maybe. So the thing about the precession of the equinox is that it's not obvious in the span of even like a couple thousand years of watching the sky. But then again, if you were taking careful enough observations, I guess I can't rule out the idea that they might have known about that. No, we're not at the space Jew part yet.
That's a tough one for a historian to understand, because it takes over 2,000 years of continuous observation to actually learn that the Earth has a wobble.
I mean, it's going to depend on the precision of your instruments, right? And we also don't know over what period of time they were watching the sky very closely, because they probably started before we start getting their written records, just so they could know things like when to plant crops and whatnot. And also, I mean, let's face it, civilization in Mesopotamia lasted more than 2,000 years, so they could have figured it out, even if Jordan is right that it always takes at least 2,000 years.
Sumerians had this information from day one of their civilization.
I mean, citation, man.
A man named Zacharias Sitchin spent a long time transcribing these texts.
No, he didn't. He spent a long time making things up, because here's the thing. When you actually ask real Sumerologists about Sitchin's translations, they're about as reasonable as Joseph Smith's translations of Egyptian, in that there essentially is no correlation. Hot take for you. Sitchin and Joseph Smith, both frauds. Yeah. They just made up expertise in ancient languages that they didn't have, and you can demonstrate it.
And have put them all together in his books. But many others have also done the same, and the interpretations are always very similar.
No, they're not, though. That's the thing. Only Sitchin's and his followers gets these detailed astronomical things and stuff about the gods coming out of the heavens and genetically engineering humans and, Nibiru and whatever. It's only Sitchin's and his sycophants. Whenever actual professional Sumerologists look at these texts, they don't find any of this. That's why it's not mainstream. Because the thing is, if these texts actually had this information, that would you could just check, right? You can go learn Sumerian. In fact, there are online courses. Check out Digital Hammurabi on YouTube. You can start learning Sumerian for free. It's really, it's a language, right? It's going to be hard work, but it's not impossible. People have done it. And the entire corpus of Sumerian texts, every single text that we have that has ever been found in Sumerian, is available online. You can read the entire body of Sumerian literature that is known to the modern day. So, the thing is, when people who aren't Sitchin fanboys ever bother, they don't come up with any of this. You can just check. Go for it. Have fun with it.
Not only that, but Thoth has also shared information about this with us, and his account matches the Sumerian records. Adamus...
Okay, hold on. So, an Egyptian god has apparently recently told us stuff that agrees with Zacharias Sitchin, but that doesn't agree with what actual Sumerologists get when they read Sumerian myths and history and king lists and whatnot. So, sure, yeah, of course. Of course an Egyptian god came down to tell you that Zacharias Sitchin was right when he lied about Sumerian texts. Yeah, that makes total sense.
And other channelings discuss it as well. If you see all of these...
Oh, it's channelings. Okay, so the convenient thing... So in case anyone doesn't know, channeling is when someone enters a trance, and then they claim that some other entity from the spirit world or another dimension or another planet or whatever is taking over and speaking through them. sort of like voluntary ghost possession. Except the thing is, there's never really a way to check it. And I'm going to predict that if you could get ways to check it, like, making demonstrable predictions, it would tend to come out as, yeah, just total nonsense. So, tell you what, have Thoth channel me the winning lottery numbers, wire me that money, I'll return the cost of the ticket after I win, and then I'll start taking channeling seriously. Till then, yeah, saying, oh, we channeled this is basically the same as saying, oh, we made this up.
Records and sources, there is a huge connection between the stories. Now, this story spans back hundreds of thousands of years into our past.
No, you just said it was channeled. So it spans back, like, at most 150 so years ago, when channeling became popular in the West. That's how far back it goes. Let's get this straight. It might be talking about hundreds of thousands of years, but it doesn't we don't actually have records from that point.
It talks about Tiamat and Nibiru, the Nephilim, seeding the human race, Adam and Eve, and the children of Lemuria.
Oh, Lemuria is fun. Okay, so Lemuria was a hypothesized sunken continent, and it was designed to explain how certain animals that were unlikely to have been able to get across the water managed to populate Polynesia, basically. And so this was before, what am I trying to say? Oh, this was before like continental drift and then later plate tectonics was widely accepted. So there was a question in biogeography. How do you get these animals onto the Polynesian islands from the Asian mainland? And no one really had a good explanation, but they did know that land could sink, because this is something that, way back in like the days of Charles Lyell, they had found that some ruins that must have been built above water were now partially submerged. And so the land has to be able to sink. Okay, fair enough. So what if the Polynesian islands, as we see them now, are actually just the peaks of an ancient sunken continent? I mean, kind of makes sense. So you call it Lemuria. But the thing is, now we know about things like the ice ages and continental drift, and it's removed any need for a sunken Lemuria continent. We just don't need it anymore. Biogeography is perfectly well explained by tracing continental movement over the course of geologic history, as well as rises and falls in sea level through glacial maxima and glacial minima over the past, ice age. Yeah.
This portion of the story is really interesting, but not the most crucial to know. We're not going to be covering this at this time. We are, however, going to be picking up the story at the end of Lemuria and discussing...
So at the end of something that we know didn't exist. Because remember, Lemuria wasn't proposed by channeling gurus or Sumerian texts. It was proposed by paleontologists and geologists to explain biogeography. Right? This is not something that has a long history in the mythical stories of, say, Southeast Asia and Polynesia. It was solely made up to explain certain scientific facts that were otherwise hard to understand.
The events of Atlantis up to present day. What I'm going to tell you is a mix of what these records say, along with what Thoth has told us for some finer details.
Okay, so a mix of non-existent records and the ramblings of a channeler in modern times. I mean, that might be this basis for a fun, like, sci-fi fantasy novel, but I don't know why Jordan thinks we should take it seriously.
Please have your own experience while
goodness.
watching this.
It looked like he was trying to strangle me. Okay.
I'm not going to tell you that this is fact.
Well, that's good, because I'm going to tell you it's complete and utter nonsense. But here we go.
I'm simply saying, decide for yourself.
Well, based on your sources, Jordan, I already have an inkling what my decision is going to be. What is that map? Hold on, we're gonna... No, it's too hard on a video this long to actually get precise rewinding, and I don't want to have to rewatch too much of this. I'm just gonna say that map doesn't look like any map of Earth at any period in its history. Is that a mustache, or is that bug mandibles on the guy on the right? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure which one I prefer, but I like the character design choice. So yeah, no, it's neat. We got golden tornadoes. Okay.
There was a time, long ago, when humans existed at a very high level of consciousness.
What are levels of consciousness? See, this is one of the things that drives me crazy about spirit science. He'll just throw out these cool-sounding terms like vibratory levels and stages of consciousness and interdimensional beings and higher dimensions and frequencies. And it's just like, what does any of this mean in this context? What are you talking about? You haven't defined any of these things. We're just supposed to be like, oh, that sounds fancy, man. Like, honestly, I can't see how you can take this seriously without being on drugs. Because it doesn't even mean anything. Unless you're going to tell me what a higher level of consciousness is, you might as well tell me that at one point, humans were on higher planes of didgeridoo cleaning alpacas. I don't even know. Whatever. It doesn't mean anything. It just sounds cool.
We were interdimensional, and were very...
What does it mean to be interdimensional? What are these dimensions? I don't know. Do you have to have levels of consciousness to get to them? Are they different from the levels of consciousness? I don't know.
Psychic. We communicated through thought and emotion, much like how animals do rather than speaking or writing.
No, animals communicate through chemical means, they communicate through body language, and they communicate by vocalization. They don't beam thoughts directly into each other's heads.
Which would seem very primitive. We lived primarily on a large string of islands called Lemuria, but...
No, we didn't. Look, here's the thing. We have the paleoanthropological, paleoarchaeological, and the archaeological evidence as to how human civilization developed and how Homo sapiens got to where they are today. And it wasn't from being on a string of islands in the middle of the ocean and then spreading to the rest of the world. Homo sapiens developed in Africa. They then spread out into the Middle East, and then from there into Western Asia and Europe, and then into East Asia, and down into Polynesia, Australia, and then up across the Bering Land Straits, which was then a land bridge, down into North America, down into South America, and a few Polynesian populations separately made it to South America. We have the bones, we have pottery shards, we have arrowheads, we have, ancient fire pits, we have the bones of other animals that show tool marks from having been processed for food by humans. We have the actual rise of civilizations independently in these places, and preceded, by the way, by cultures that were pre-civilized. They didn't quite build cities yet, and they weren't always completely sedentary, but that show artistic and material links to the later civilizations, which means those later civilizations were outgrowths of those earlier cultures. So, you can't just say that because Zechariah Sitchin lied about what Sumerian records say, and because some dude claiming to be possessed by the Egyptian god of knowledge said so, that none of this is true. You have to deal with the actual physical evidence in the literature regarding this topic. But here we go, let's get some more in.
There was a consciousness shift. We moved up in consciousness, and the islands of Lemuria sank beneath the oceans.
Wait, hold on. So first, we don't know what a consciousness level is, and I'm going to assume that consciousness shift is moving between them, because he then says we moved up in consciousness. But I thought we were already at a higher level of consciousness, so high levels of consciousness make islands sink? Why? Why is that? I can't even imagine a causal link between these two things. Is it a coincidence? See, this is the thing. It's starting to fall apart even as fanfic, right? Because the thing is, you're not even engaging in good world building here. One of the things about world building is you have to make a world that at least makes sense on its own terms, right? So we'll take, for example, something that most people have heard of. You guys know what Star Wars is, right? So in Star Wars, we know certain things about how the world is supposed to work. There are aliens. They don't all speak the same language, but a lot of people seem to just speak a lot of languages. So that's just a thing about the world. You can learn languages, that's easy. We know that overall, on like Newtonian scales, physics seems to work about the same. Things fall, momentum seems to work more or less the same way. There's the introduction of this hyperspace thing, that's new physics. There's also some magical thing called the Force, but we have some ideas about how that works. It's a sort of a spiritual thing that you have to be attuned to, and some people are born naturally with a gift to be able to access it, and other people aren't. And then we have ideas about what kinds of things it can do. And we also know that there are some people who are resistant to it and whatnot. And when Star Wars stories follow these rules, then the reader or the viewer can understand what's happening. But with this, there's just word salad followed by event with no obvious causal link. It's hard to get engaged in the story even as fiction at this point. All right, where'd my mouse cursor go? There it is. I hate when you losing your mouse cursor is the worst. Oh, and by the way, if you guys are enjoying this, please do hit like.
At the time of this shift, a new continent rose out of the waters.
Oh,
we
good.
called it Atlantis.
Okay, so you drew it in the same place, but so I don't know. Did the island sink and then Atlantis rose up from them? I'm not sure. Was it in a new place? Why did it rise up? Is the Earth in tune to levels of consciousness of humans, whatever those are? See, none of this gets explained. At least it hasn't been.
Back in the early 1900s, the spiritual path of the United States was similar to what's happening today. People began to learn about meditation and study ancient lands like Atlantis and Lemuria.
No, grifters and, well, let's call them hopeful idiots went around with stories about ancient continents and sunken civilizations. On the one hand, because, well, seeking adventure is fun, and you can come back and write a fun adventure travel log. And two, because people will pay money to grifters who promise to find Atlantis or whatever. I mean, that's really all we need to explain this. And it wasn't so much meditation in the sense of say things like from Brahmic religions that was becoming popular. It was more like the spiritualism seance thing. At least in the early 20th century. By the mid-20th century, some of that sort of Brahmic religion type meditation was starting to make its way in, though.
We actually found quite a bit of evidence that Lemuria existed, and it had to do with coral. See, the ocean floor does rise and fall. Coral can exist up to 150 feet under the surface of the water. In 1910, the surface of the ocean was probably higher because they were able to see coral rings heading away from Easter Islands for...
Okay, but it's not the overall level of the ocean. If the whole ocean floor were to raise up by 10 meters, it would just push up the water level. But that's not what we're seeing. Certain areas, especially volcanically active areas, can rise and subside because, volcanoes do that kind of thing. So if you're going to say that the continent of Atlantis and all of the islands of Lemuria were all volcanoes, well, then it should be easy to find them. Because volcanoes... If you have, undersea sonar and radar to map out the ocean, which, spoiler alerts, humans do have, they're not hard to find. Humans basically know where all the seamounts are. And none of them are easy to correlate with Atlantis or Lemuria or anything else like that.
Great distance. These rings were estimated to be found at 1,800 feet, which means that for them to have existed, they would have had to be much higher and sunk slowly. Probably more important, they also found the exact same fauna and flora from the Hawaiian Islands all the way to the Easter Islands. This is a great distance, but if you look at a map, you'll see a long string. That's
true. You'll actually see seamounts that way. And so this part is fair. The islands throughout Polynesia, there are a bunch of volcanically active areas there. There's basically a plume of magma underneath what's now Hawaii. And that's why Hawaii has so much volcanism. And yeah, all throughout the Pacific, there are little atolls and whatnot that are essentially currently inactive volcanoes that have sunk down as the pressure subsided, that were once much taller. Yeah, that's fair. And there are also areas where what was an undersea seamount is now rising up, and coral is being pushed, well, coral skeletons are being pushed up above, forming islands composed primarily of coral skeletons. And this sort of island hopping is a way for shallow marine organisms to get across the Pacific. So, you know, that's not too unreasonable. And apparently, Jordan describes levels of consciousness elsewhere. Maybe I'll have to take a look at that. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like me to take a look at. Maybe that would be fun.
String, according to Thoth, used to run along the western shores of Lemuria. It is only on these islands that have the same flora and fauna. Same trees, bugs, bacteria, everything. Science can only explain this if there were closer land bridges between these islands at one point.
Or if there were sequential islands going up and down, which is actually what's probably going on. So, yeah, that's another option.
Although we were studying this at that time, World War I began soon after, and we lost interest in spirituality and the ancient lands for a very long time. After the sinking of Lemuria and the rising of Atlantis, at first the human race became scattered. We moved to various islands and continents all over the world because we...
But see, here's the thing. If that happened then, and apparently Atlantis and Lemuria were in the Pacific Ocean. Because, I mean, that's what he's talking about, Pacific Islands as having this biogeographic evidence of this dispersal patterns with marine organisms. Okay, so Jordan's hypothesis here is that the Pacific Ocean is where humans originate from. Now what that means is we should see the highest genetic diversity in areas around the Pacific Rim. So places like Japan, China, Australia, Alaska, California, the Andes, all of these should be the places with the highest genetic population or diversity in humans. But in point of fact, all of those places have extremely low genetic diversity compared to the human population as a whole. These are all places with very, very low genetic diversity. And the place with very, very high genetic diversity is East Central Africa. And genetic diversity decreases with distance from East Africa. And it's not just distance, you know, as a crow flies. It's overland distance that you could follow with migratory patterns of actual humans migrating from that area. So the genetic data just completely blows this idea out of the water. There is no option which allows us to come to the conclusion that the Pacific is the center for human diversity. It's just not. Sorry, Jordan. Maybe if you put Atlantis off the coast of, like, Ethiopia or something, maybe that'd work. I don't know.
We didn't have a home. Yet. We didn't know where to go. At that time, there were about 1,000 humans at a very high consciousness, more than all of the rest.
What? 1,000 humans? Look, if there were 1,000 humans any time in the last few 100,000 years, which apparently is what we're talking about here, it would be very evident, because human genetic diversity itself would be lower. Now, there are reports in the literature of a human bottleneck signal in which humans were probably reduced to a few tens of thousands of individuals, and that persisted probably for a few thousand years. But a few thousand individuals is an order of magnitude lower, and there just is no such signal in, the human genome. Like, genetic researchers could tell if this were the case. We can tell that a similar bottleneck did happen with cheetahs. In fact, it was a more severe one than that. And we can tell when it happened, and we can see the effects of a severe bottleneck like that in modern cheetahs, in that they are extremely low in diversity. And they're basically as related to any two random cheetahs are as closely related to each other genetically as basically full siblings are for humans, which is a really low amount of genetic diversity. But yet, no, there is no point in all of human existence where the population of humans was under 10,000.
were called the Nakals. Today, we know them as Ascended Masters. The Nakals began preparing Atlantis to be our new home. They projected their energies across the surface of the continent in the form of the Tree of Life, not with
That doesn't even fit on the continent? Okay. You know, Jordan, you're making up this map. You could have just put an island under that lower right-hand circle. You could just do it. Why didn't you? At least it could have made sense. Oh my goodness. Apparently, the New Age community believes that Lemuria was the Atlantis of the Pacific Ocean. It predated Atlantis, and you don't have to worry about geography when you have teleporting aliens experimenting with monkeys. I guess that's fair. But the thing is then, once you introduce, like, essentially omnipotent monkey-tampering aliens, then all of this just becomes unfalsifiable nonsense. And, yeah.
10 circles, but with 12. An extra on top on the island of Udal, and an extra on the bottom in the water.
Oh, I guess it was supposed to be in the water. Sure.
There were 10 components on the mainland, and even though it extended over 100...
Oh, they weren't just golden tornadoes, they were Tree of Life tornadoes. Okay, fair enough.
hundreds of miles on the surface, it was projected to the accuracy of a single atom.
What does that even... What? They looked pretty big, so I don't even know what it means to have the accuracy of a single atom. Like, I don't know how this projection is supposed to work, what it's a projection of, how people are supposed to perceive it. So telling me that it has that according to some guy pretending to be an Egyptian god, it had this kind of accuracy, doesn't mean anything to me. Because when you make up a story, you can make it as impressive as you want. Like, hey guys, did you know that when I was a kid, I had a spaceship that could fly at 18 trillion times the speed of light, and it was longer than 45 galaxies put together? Who cares?
Chose to move to Atlantis because of the Kundalini. In humans,
What?
the Kundalini is often referred to as the energy serpent that runs up and down your spine.
Okay, but there isn't an energy serpent that runs up and down your spine. And we know because we've opened up people's spines. So, problem solved. Now, if you want to say it's some spiritual whatever, great. But then you're going to have to explain how the apparently physical continent of Atlantis was interfacing with this spiritual whatever in your spine in a way that actually was perceptible by the humans involved. Which basically means you're going to have to make testable predictions.
When activated, it provides an immense amount of energy through all of the chakras.
Oh.
The Earth
Chakras. Well, maybe we'll get into chakras later.
itself also has a Kundalini because the Earth is alive, like an organism, running from the center of the planet to a specific place on the surface.
No, the Earth is not alive. Look, the Earth doesn't undergo any metabolic processes. It doesn't reproduce. It can't evolve. It's not alive. Earth is an inanimate object. It has life in and on it, but it is not alive.
Wherever the Kundalini resides, the people there become the spiritual leaders of the world.
Okay, well, where is it then? That should be easy to find. So, first, tell me where it is, then I'll check, and if the people there are the spiritual leaders of the world, then sure, there's a spiritual Kundalini for the Earth. But here's the problem with that. There isn't an area where the spiritual leaders of the world exist. Is it Rome? I mean, the Pope is the spiritual leader of basically the largest single religion with a single leader. But the not even close to a majority of people are Catholics. I mean, is it, say, some area with a famous Buddhist monastery? Well, most people aren't Buddhists. There is no majority of spiritual practice that can be said to have an area with spiritual leaders for the world. So until that happens, you can't even make a prediction about this whole Kundalini thing. Unless, of course, it's gone now. But then, of course, the question is, well, how do we know it ever existed?
The Earth chose Atlantis to be the new energetic center of the planet. After Atlantis,
What does it mean to be an energetic center? What kind of energy is this? Is it thermal energy? Because that sounds like a bad idea. Is it kinetic energy? Because it's just a continent, it can't move anywhere. Is it potential energy? Was it up in the air? What kind of energy? Was it chemical energy? Was the whole thing just made of coal? You can't just say the energetic center and then leave it at that. What kind of energy?
The Kundalini moved to the mountains of Tibet, which is why the Buddhists were the leaders in pure spirituality for the last 13,000 years.
13,000 years? The Buddha didn't even live 13,000 years ago, Jordan. What are you smoking and where did you get it? Because, oh my goodness. 13,000 years? No. Just no. Plus, guess what? You don't just get to say that the Buddhist monks in Tibet are the leaders in pure spirituality. How do you know? What makes their spirituality more pure than, say, a Russian ascetic living in a cabin and being friends with a bear? Why? Oh, I know. It's because Jordan has a bias against Western religions and towards Eastern religions. So even though the level of asceticism and devotion is not really all that noticeably different between some Russian monk in a cabin in Siberia hanging out with bears and spending all of his time praying, and a Tibetan monk living in some monastery up in the mountains spending all of his time meditating, yeah, even though it's hard to distinguish which one is more pure or more spiritual, Jordan's just going to go with the Buddhists and say, oh, that's where the Kundalini is in Tibet. But the thing is, not even all Buddhists consider Tibetan Buddhism to be their sort of like ideal Buddhism. There are sects of Buddhism. And, sure, Tibetan and Nepalese Buddhism is fairly famous, probably because of the Dalai Lama. But, yeah, it's far from the only form.
It was a very pure place. It moved again within the last 10 years, but that's a story for another time.
Okay, so now there's a new spiritual center for the world, but that's a story for a different time. And for $5 from Carrie Bronson, did the Jewish space laser prompt the resurgence of space Jew memes? Actually, I think it might have. I honestly wouldn't have space Jews on my radar had it not been for the idea of Jewish space lasers. Oh, okay, Tyler West let me know the energy center of the world now lies in Lenox, Alabama at Dinosaur Adventureland. Nice.
If you want to read more, check out the book The Serpent of Light by Drunvalo Melchizedek. Suddenly, in a single...
Oh, Drunvalo Melchizedek. He's one of those guys who likes to channel things. Which, of course, means, until proven otherwise, he's a guy who likes to make things up. Because the difference between channeling and making things up, from a functional standpoint, is how theatrical you are about it, basically.
Day, the Nakals breathed life into the Tree of Life on the surface of Atlantis. This created vortexes of energy rotating out of each and every circle.
Okay. Well, first, I like the Hobbit hole. That's nice. But the Nakals breathed life. Oh, and $2 from Van Nandley in 1998, who says, late fee for not getting here on time with a Mothra emoji. Thank you very much. And you know what? I'll take a sip of my drink, even though I'm not really, drinking. But hey, I have a beverage here. Mostly because I cannot talk this much without my throat getting, dry and sore if I don't have some kind of liquid here. So, okay, so the Nakals, who, remember, are apparently the only humans around, and there's only a few thousand of them, breathe life, which again, don't really know what that means from a physical standpoint, right? That sounds like just a bunch of words. And it created energy vortexes. What kind of energy? We don't know. Not defined. Around the circles, which again, how were the circles made? Because apparently they were very precise, but what were they? We don't really know that either. So, and yeah, the plural of vortex is vortices. So yeah, you are correct there. So yeah, this is just a wonderful word salad that has trouble making sense on its own terms.
Once the vortexes were established, the children of Lemuria began to be called forth. Millions upon millions of Lemurians who had set...
Okay, so before there were only a few thousand humans, but now there are millions of Lemurians, which means either there weren't a few thousand humans, or Lemurians aren't humans, or Jordan just can't keep his story straight.
Settled all across the planet, began to be pulled toward Atlantis. A great migration began.
Ooh, I figured it out. Maybe the Lemurians were actually Homo erectus, and they were called to Atlantis, which is them actually, kind of being replaced by Homo sapiens coming from Africa. Then when Atlantis sank, they all died. See, that probably is going to make more sense than whatever Jordan's going to come up with, but hey. Oh, the Nakals were just advanced spiritual leaders of the human race. Okay. Fair enough.
However, the Lemurian body of consciousness had only reached the age of 12 as a planetary consciousness. Because we were right-brained, we were...
It only reached the age of 12. Do you have some measurement system? Can you measure the IQ of the planetary consciousness and assign it an effective age? How does that work? What's the test like? Who do you give it to? How do you score it? I don't know. I don't think Jordan knows. We're just the age of 12 planetarily. Okay.
A female species,
Oh.
like a 12-year-old girl. And some of our centers weren't working yet.
What does it mean that they weren't working yet? Did they not have energy vortices of undefined substance and type and use? Why weren't they working? Weren't the Nakals powerful, magical, 30-foot tall, three-eyed whatevers? Why didn't they fix it? I don't know, maybe we'll find out.
We had worked with these energies, but only mastered 8 of the 10. Each
circle has its own energy? You didn't say that earlier. So we only mastered 8 of the 10 energies, even though there were 12 circles, because there were extra circles, one on an island and one in the water, for some reason. And then they all created energy vortices, but apparently the energy in each vortex was different, but it didn't make the 2 energy vortices on the kinds that we hadn't mastered because we were all 12-year-old girls. But mentally, but not individually, on a planetary scale. Yep, this makes... all of that totally makes sense. None of this is crazy nonsense.
migrating Lemurian was attracted to one of these 8 centers on Atlantis. Depending on the nature of the individual, there they settled and began to build cities. That left 2 vortexes with nobody using them, not a single person.
Okay, so hold on. There were vortices there, but no one went there. So, because no one was drawn there, because they hadn't mastered the energy of the vortices? Like, at this point, I'm not even trying to critique it. I'm just trying to figure out what is actually happening. Like, this has not been well enough set up as far as I'm concerned. Now, I know I've been told in the chat that apparently some of these concepts are explained in other videos. But, and yeah, the Tree of Life thing that he's showing is, it's a shape taken from Kabbalistic texts, which Kabbalah is a mystic tradition in Judaism that looks at various biblical passages for deeper meaning and uses numerology and things like that to come up with mystical understandings of the Torah, and it has some interesting theological aspects that are not currently very mainstream in Judaism, but they were at one point much more popular. But yeah, anyway.
These 2 vortexes were pulling life toward them, and in life, you can't have an empty place. Life will find a way to fill it. Similar to if you were driving along a freeway, following another car, and you drop too far behind, someone will fill the place.
I mean, unless they want to keep going faster in that left lane. So it's not a really great analogy. I don't know. And yeah, it's the Sephiroth diagram, Dread Lindworm. So, okay, but sure, these vortices have energies that pull life, but only some life is attuned to the energy. Okay, I kind of get it now, I think. My goodness. This guy needs to take writing classes to, like, work on his world building. You know, there are world building channels on YouTube, Jordan. You could just subscribe to a few of them and watch some videos and, like, rework this into a way that's coherent.
That's exactly what happened on Atlantis.
Oh no!
Though the Lemurians had only filled 8 of the vortex areas, Mayan records state clearly that there were 10 cities in Atlantis when it fell.
No, they don't, because Mayan records don't say anything about Atlantis. They just don't. So the Mayans have this idea that they were living in the 4th world, And the previous 3 worlds have been destroyed by the gods because basically the people that the gods had created to fill the worlds were insufficiently good at worshipping the gods. Apparently, I guess that's a reason to destroy those worlds. But there was no idea that all of humans came from some far distant land that had existed thousands of years ago. Like, no. The previous world ends, the gods create new people, a new age begins, and then if the gods become dissatisfied, they kill off the people, create new people out of something new, and there you go, the world begins again. And the Mayans thought they were living in, I believe, and I mean, double check, I don't have it in front of me, I believe they were in the 4th such world. None of this correlates well with this whole Atlantis story. So, again, just things that aren't actually in the texts that Jordan thinks they're in.
You can see these records in the Troano document, which is now located in the British Museum. This document is estimated to be 3,500 years old, and it describes...
The text could reasonably be that old. The document couldn't, because paper documents weren't part of Mayan culture until after contact with Europe. Europeans imported that technology. All of the codices that you see of Mayan glyphs and whatnot written on paper are post-contact, and usually what's happening is there are people copying down inscriptions, but not always. So no, it's not whatever thousands of years old. It's at most a few hundred years old.
In detail, the sinking of Atlantis. To fill these 2 empty vortexes, according to Thoth, 2 extraterrestrial races stepped in. Not 1, but 2 completely different races. The first race were the Hebrews.
There it is, guys. Jews aren't just from space. They're a completely alien race. Now, never mind the fact that they speak a language, that Hebrew itself is a language that's deeply connected to other human languages, especially the Semitic languages like Arabic, Aramaic, Akkadian, all of those, as well as more distantly other Afro-Asiatic languages like ancient Egyptian or Berber. Now, who cares? Let's forget the fact that we can actually find markers for Jewish genetic ancestry, and that they fit well within that group of sort of Semitic-speaking peoples in the Middle East. Primarily, you can look at like their Y chromosome, which is typically in the J haplogroup, which itself fits nicely into our overall phylogeny of humans spreading out from Africa. Never mind the fact that I don't know if you guys know this, but spoiler alerts: Jews are successful at reproducing with other people when they try it. Yeah, there's no significant or measurable interfertility problem between Jewish people and non-Jewish people. Everything we can possibly find to talk about the identity of the ancient Hebrews all the way to modern Jews indicates that they're just humans. So for $5 from Vandali 1998, we have, what did your people do to make the gods mad 66 million years ago? We made too much noise, man. We're very, very noisy. The space Jews gave the Mayans paper over 3,000 years ago from Nestle 20. Thromulus for $5 says, no, the Jews are still from Earth, just future Earth. I like it. Yeah, the Jews are time travelers, and the people back in Atlantis only thought they were from space because they used their Jewish time-traveling space lasers to go back in time to Atlantis. And, of course, Carrie Bronson for $3 sends a super sticker of what looks like a guy, looks like a lemon, guy with a lemon for a head. I like it. I'm not exactly sure how to describe it, though, so that people who perhaps aren't watching chat will get it. Oh, you know what? Who cares? It's on screen. If you're watching this video, look at the screen and see what Carrie Bronson sent you. Thank you very much, Carrie Bronson. All right, so let's see who the next group are.
Coming from our future.
Oh, look, it was right. Romulus was right. They're coming from our future. Okay, so future Jews are extraterrestrial. So Jews are extraterrestrials from Earth, from the future, according to Jordan, even though some of those words are mutually contradictory. Okay. Also, apparently, we now know that the people who invent time travel are the Jews. Congratulations, guys. I mean, good job. It's not super surprising. All you have to do is look at like the huge number of Nobel Prize winners in sciences that have gone to people of Jewish descent, and yeah, if there were any ethnic group that were gonna invent time travel, I wouldn't be surprised if it were the Jews, because they place. Look, Jewish culture places a really high premium on education, and in large part that's because of a history of being pretty downtrodden, and one of the only ways to get ahead is to just get smart about whatever you can, become highly skilled, and then no matter how much people hate you, if they need your skills, they're going to have to come to you. And so that's one of the reasons why Jewish culture has, for a very long time now, placed a pretty high premium on education. So, yeah, there we go. Future extraterrestrial Jews from space.
Thoth says that they came from off-planet, but we don't know where exactly.
Okay, so Thoth, again, remember, that's just some guy in the 20th century making stuff up. But Thoth says that Jews came from the future, our future, on another planet. So at some point, Jews go, well, at least some Jews, go colonize a planet out in space. And also, perhaps, someone invents time travel, presumably them. Then they use it to travel back in time to Atlantis because a vortex was calling them there from the future of another planet that's our future. Yeah, okay, sure. Let's go with that. That works out. Now, it also makes me wonder if these Jews traveled from the future, why the initial well, I guess these Hebrews, first of all, why weren't they called Jews? The name change from Hebrew to Jew has happened thousands of years ago. I don't see it going back, but maybe it will. That's not the craziest thing, right? Maybe they'll like, oh, we're going to retake that name. We're going to use our older name. Okay, fine. But it doesn't explain why the earliest evidence of written Hebrew doesn't use any modern version of the Hebrew script, even though modern Hebrew scripts are much more aesthetically pleasing and generally easier to write with a pen, which is more convenient. So why was there regression, basically, in Hebrew scriptural, not scriptural in the sense of like, the Bible, but scriptural in the sense of being able to write in a script? Why is there regression of that in the archaeological record? Why don't they start out with a really nice advanced script? Why don't they adopt other scripts? Who knows?
The Hebrews were kind of like a kid who went through 5th grade and didn't make it, so they had to do that grade over again.
Ouch! What? Okay, so up until then, I wasn't willing to say that this was just some weird anti-Semitic thing, because I don't think that, like, coming from the future is, like, I don't see that as a bad thing. But then it's just like, oh no, sorry, Hebrews, you got held back in school, so you had to go back to the past from another planet, because apparently on your new planet in the future, you failed a 5th grade test? So is this a time loop grandfather paradox? Yeah, basically it must be. Yeah. If the Jews came from the future, why didn't they give the heads up to avoid a country named Germany around the first half of the 20th century? I mean, you would think so, right? Maybe in their fall from grace in the future, they lost all their historical records. I don't know.
They learned all the math, the left brain stuff, but they didn't get the right brain aspect of evolving consciousness.
Okay, sure. Maybe they used all that math to travel back in time to the vortex that was calling them, that was apparently also a punishment.
They didn't graduate to the next level of evolution, so they had to do it again. They knew a lot of things that we didn't know yet, and
like how to draw squarish spirals around pyramids that don't actually correspond to that? Okay.
Brought many concepts and ideas to us that we weren't aware of yet. Now, if this is true, this would explain quite a few things about the Hebrew people in general.
Like what? What single thing could possibly be explained about modern Jewish people by saying the Hebrews were time-traveling extraterrestrial humans? Oh my goodness, for $5, Carrie Bronson says, a later video establishes superwise aliens that are tall, blonde, and pale. Just saying. Ouch. Yeah. Jordan, I I don't like to say it, but I kind of feel like I might catch Jordan goose-stepping at some, New Age conventions. Okay. This is... Okay, here we go. Let's find out what we can learn about actual people in the modern day based on the idea that Hebrews are time-traveling alien humans.
They seem to have many sacred geometries hidden within their culture.
No. You took symbols from Judaism and anachronistically put them back into your nonsense stories that were made up in the 20th century. Jordan, the flow of ideas that we can actually trace reliably doesn't go from this ancient Atlantis having these sacred geometries that then the Jews showed up knowing about. The actual way we can trace it is people finding Judaic mysticism cool in the 20th century and then appropriating it for their own Atlantis fanfic. That's the actual chain of causality that we can establish here.
It also puts perspective on the story of Exodus. Perhaps Moses incarnated into that lifetime to free the Hebrews because they were not direct descendants of humans and were being treated unfairly.
Okay, so wait, they're not humans, but they're from our future, from a different planet, and yet we know genetically that they are humans. You gotta pick a lane, dude. And if you're gonna say that Hebrews aren't humans, you're gonna have to show some evidence. What makes them not human? How do you know? We can sequence DNA from the Bronze Age, right? And we're not finding a population of people that look human but that aren't. My goodness. Also, by the way, this was a good movie. This animated Prince of Egypt. Yeah, Prince of Egypt. Good movie.
Or could it be that Moses was visited by an ascended master of the Hebrews who guided him to free their people?
Wait, why didn't the ascended master guide them? Do they just have a bunch of ascended masters? Are these people from... Do the ascended masters live in the future? Or did they live in the past and now they're projecting themselves forward in time? I would like to know.
Given what we know about dimensions and consciousness, it definitely puts a fresh perspective on old stories that didn't make much sense.
What didn't make sense about the story of Moses? Now, okay, look, I'm not talking about the historical accuracy or truth of the whole Exodus story, right? Because there's essentially no extra biblical evidence that it happened, and there's good reason to think that the story as literally described couldn't happen. But the story itself makes reasonable amounts of sense, right? There's this concern about a growing slave population that is apparently kind of in a rebellious mood. So the king goes ahead and decides to crush some of that by killing off a generation of males. And since, at the time, men were generally the leaders in any group, even an enslaved population, that should probably put a big damper on any, rebellions in the next few decades. Okay. Someone finds out about this. She doesn't want her son killed, so she takes her chance, puts him in a waterproofed basket on the river. He's found. Sure, it's a bit of a coincidence that he's found by a princess, but, it's not impossible. Okay, he's raised in the Egyptian court, but in the Bible, unlike a lot of movie adaptations, he does in fact actually always know that he's Hebrew. But then he sees his countrymen being mistreated, so he kills the overseer. Then he runs because now he's wanted for murder. Then, since we're taking this story from the Bible, we're just going to assume that, God is real, because that's the context of the story. So God comes to him and he says, "Hey, Moses, I saved you through, through the actions of your mother and the princess and whatever. So you can go and lead your people out of bondage." So he can go and speak with the Egyptians from some place of relative privilege from his upbringing. But also he has the motivation to go help his people. God gives him some magical abilities. He can turn his staff into a snake, and he can make his hand white, like it's a corpse hand or something, and then restore it. Okay. Then Pharaoh's like, nah, I don't want to do it. So God decides to convince him by sending plagues. The only part that I would say makes not that much sense of the story is where it says that it's God who's actually hardening Pharaoh's heart, but also God who's sending the plagues. Because at that point you could ask, well, you could just not harden Pharaoh's heart and not send the plagues, and then everyone gets to be happy. So other than that, I don't see what actually doesn't make much sense about the whole story. Now, like I said, this is separate from did it happen, because the archaeological evidence seems to indicate no, it didn't. But as a story goes, it's significantly more coherent than anything that Jordan has said so far. So, yeah.
We could talk about this more, but let's continue for now.
Okay.
There were no problems caused by the Hebrews coming to Atlantis. They actually benefited our evolution. The other race that stepped in caused big problems. These beings came from the nearby planet of Mars.
Okay, so we know a few things about how Mars was a few 100,000 years ago, which is to say it was essentially the same as it is now. So we have evidence that at one point Mars did have a thick atmosphere and liquid water, and it could have been able to support, complex life like we would know it. But that hasn't been the case for a few billion years. A few 100,000 years ago, Mars was essentially as it is now, a cold, dry desert with almost no atmosphere. An atmosphere that's around 100th the thickness of Earth's. So, unless these Martians were also time travelers, but this time from the past, no Martians came to Earth.
See, according to Thoth, Mars looked very much like Earth a little less than 1 million years ago.
But it didn't. It definitely didn't. The thing is, we can get like relative ages, and even in some cases get some estimates as to absolute ages for various features on Mars. So for instance, we have floodplains on Mars, but we can see that they're overlaid by a certain amount of craters, which themselves can be sometimes overlaid with further layers of cratering. And we also know from Earth and tests on things like the moon and Earth, when various periods of high levels of impact events were going on in the solar system. And we know that these flooding events would have had to have happened during periods when comets are much more common, or not well, comets, there's just basically bolides were more common. Bolide is basically anything that impacts the planet. Anyway, were more common in the solar system than they are now. But 1 million years ago, they weren't significantly different than they are now. So we know that these had to have happened a long, long time ago, like billions of years ago. We also can actually calculate, based on things like the strength of Mars's magnetic field, which, spoiler alert, is very low, the amount of solar flux it gets from the sun, things like that, how long it would take to lose its initial atmosphere, which we know it must have had in order to keep water liquid. And we know it would have lost it billions of years ago. An Earth like Mars, under 1 million years ago, is not an option that's left to us. We don't have that option.
It was beautiful. It had oceans and water and trees that were just fantastic.
Oh, good.
But something happened to them, and it has to do with something called the Lucifer experiment. From the very beginning of creation, everything is simply an experiment. Creation itself was just consciousness creating and inhabiting itself in that creation. There is no divine plan. Spirit can do whatever it wants. Having said that, if Spirit decides to cut itself off from the rest of consciousness and create a separate reality on its own, it can do that too. This is called the Lucifer experiment.
So, Martian, I'm going to guess that these are Martians because they're red and because this is connected to the Lucifer experiment. So, the Martians cut themselves off from consciousness, or the rest of the consciousness, to create an alternate reality which ruined Mars. But did that put Mars in the alternate reality, or just the Martians? And if they're in an alternate reality, how did they get to our reality to get to Atlantis? See, once again, we're getting back into this whole, these words don't actually fit together in any way that makes sense. But we'll see what happens.
Because Spirit is God, it can do this. There is nothing wrong with that. We've kind of been led to believe that Lucifer is evil and the devil. This just isn't true. Lucifer is just another means of perceiving the reality. It is not a unity perception of oneness, but rather a duality perception of two-ness.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what you should think of the character Lucifer in, you know, the Judeo-Christian religious tradition, but whatever. Two centers instead of one, okay.
There is a flower of life pattern for Lucifer as well, but that's a big topic for another time. Anytime the Lucifer experiment has been attempted in the universe, it always ends in failure.
Okay, but you just said it wasn't wrong or bad. But apparently it always sucks. So maybe it is wrong or bad. I don't know.
The species will cut itself off from love and will become incredibly male, left-brained.
Oh, apparently men don't have love? What is even happening right now? Like, I don't even know. So apparently men, the more masculine you are, the fewer emotions you have, or just the fewer positive emotions you have? Is that what we're getting at? Because I don't know if that's true. Now, we do tend to associate a certain level of, like, you know, stoicness and lack of emoting to very masculine individuals, but remaining calm and not emoting much does not equate to not having emotions. So yeah, I don't know why we would compare not having emotions to being masculine. AT2 Production says, let me help you. Stop it. You're expecting sense from a person/group that has actively decided to go against reason. Yeah, basically. But you know what, though? I'm having fun with it. It's nonsensical, and sometimes I like to just enjoy the crazy nonsense of whatever is happening here. But, my beverage has run out, and so I'm going to go get a refill while I leave you with Intermission, and I will be back shortly. So please enjoy, and remember to hit like and subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and I will be back in just a few minutes.
Oh, Nani? Dare? Oh, Ojira desu ka? Hai, Gojira-san. Hai.
All right, well, thank you for sticking with me through the break, those of you who did, which, by the way, I'm noticing that I'm having 63, according to YouTube, concurrent viewers, but only 36 likes. So if you are enjoying the show, please do give me a like. It really does help, and I know it sounds like the cringy YouTuber thing, but what can I say? I want the channel to grow, and yeah. Now, I was having thoughts while I was gone getting my new beverage, and I realized that of the 3 people I've been responding to lately, one is Kent Hovind, because, we do Kent with Bent. So I responded to him Tuesday. I'll be responding to him again next Tuesday. But the other one was Matt Powell. Now, in case you guys don't know this, I'm going to be having a guest spot on Vice Rhino's channel while he's taking a little bit of vacation time. And so I made a video for him that it is on the channel, but you have to be a member or a patron to get the link. So if you want to watch it before it goes live on Vice Rhino's channel, you can, but only if you're in one of those groups. So the Kent Hovind, Matt Powell, and then I finished actually making the videos for my series on Jordan's take on alien conspiracies, and now I'm doing this. And of those 3, Jordan is the craziest. I thought it was going to be Matt Powell because his alien conspiracy theory isn't as bonkers as this, right? It's just stock standard conspiracy nuttery. But this is crazier than Matt Powell saying that chicken legs are evolved from Tyrannosaurus arms. So, yeah. I didn't honestly think that in such a short space of time I would find something crazier than Matt Powell's take on dinosaurs. But, yeah, this is it. So let's see what happens. Oh, men are greedy. My goodness. Apparently men just suck. Wow. This is like the Jordan here is basically like the incel's worst version of like a straw man of feminism. Like, that's what's happening right now. That is what Jordan thinks. Jordan basically is that. You know what we should do? We should sick the incels on Jordan. Because his take on masculinity is way crazier than most takes I've heard coming out of even some of the parts of the crazy wings of feminism, because there were crazy parts of that too. But yeah, apparently men are just the worst. Oh. Of course it did. You guys aren't hearing... Oh my goodness. Alright, let me... Okay, hold on. I'm gonna back up a little bit, because apparently you guys didn't hear that. Sorry about that. That's my bad.
Anytime the Lucifer experiment has been attempted in the universe, it always ends in failure. The species will cut itself off from love, and will become incredibly male, left-brained. What always ends up happening is that everyone becomes very greedy. There is no compassion for one another, and everyone ends up fighting until they end up killing themselves.
Yeah, so that was the take on men that I was complaining about. That is... yeah, I don't even know. That was... yeah.
More than 1 million years ago, the beings on Mars joined the Lucifer experiment, and it failed dramatically. Basically, they cut themselves off from the unity of the universe and created a separate reality. When the Martians...
Okay, but Jordan, I'm really hoping that you explain how they got from their separate reality to our reality. So let's... fingers crossed.
Severed the love bond, they became pure male, logical beings with no emotions.
No emotions, but they were really angry and greedy. How can you be angry and greedy without having any emotions? At least the angry part. Like, maybe greed isn't an emotion. I don't know. But anger sure is. And if you're a pure logical being, then why are you going down a path that leads to all of you dying? What? Like, again, it's just inconsistent world building, Jordan. You can't have everyone be an angry murderer who's also a cold, dispassionate, logical person. Those things don't go together.
What happened on Mars was that they ended up fighting. Mars became a battleground. Eventually, it became...
And yeah, I know, he's not saying men, technically, he's saying masculinity. But that does mean that people who enjoy masculine things and who are, fairly masculine are going to have these negative traits, apparently. And the majority of such people are men. And most men tend to be fairly masculine. Now, there's nothing wrong with not being that way, or with being a woman who's masculine, or anywhere in between all that. But there are trends. So I'm kind of shorthanding it, which I know is not entirely fair to Jordan. But, I mean, I feel like I'm being fair enough to him. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a jerk.
Clear that Mars was not going to survive. They blew their atmosphere away and destroyed the surface of the planet. Nova recently did an episode on planetary magnetics, and they found some interesting things about Mars. The planet didn't have a magnetic system, however the surface was magnetized.
Yeah, so this is not very surprising, right? So the reason that planets have magnetic fields is because they have molten cores that are in motion with electrically conductive material, right? So, for instance, we think that in the case of Jupiter, it's probably liquid metallic hydrogen, which is a phase of hydrogen under extremely high amounts of pressure, where it actually ends up acting like a metal, in that rather than having hydrogen nuclei bound to a single electron, you actually have hydrogen nuclei and free electrons flowing through a liquid phase of this hydrogen. And the thing that makes metals metal, basically, is that the electrons in a metal are not tightly bound to the nucleus. They're free to roam between them. That's one of the reasons why they have very, very low resistance to electricity, because the electrons in there are already just flowing around. So with Mars, though, you start out with having essentially the same reason for having a magnetic field as Earth, which is a bunch of molten iron. But the problem with Mars, though, is that because it's smaller, it radiates away heat faster as a proportion of the actual thermal energy contained in the body, right? So Mars is much, much smaller than Earth, which means that over the same period of time, it's going to radiate away a much higher percentage of its thermal energy, because it doesn't have as much to start with, and it has a higher surface area to volume ratio. Those two things combined means that the core of Mars is going to start to cool down and stop producing as strong a magnetic field. But that means you get two things. One, Mars does not typically resurface itself very well because it doesn't have plate tectonics. So while it does have a few volcanoes, they're in set locations. The surface doesn't get subducted and reworked like it does on Earth. Which means you can find very old rocks on Mars. Which means you can find rocks on Mars that were formed back when it still had a significant magnetosphere, which would have been billions of years ago. So this doesn't help Jordan at all, and it certainly doesn't allow for an Earth like Mars less than 1 million years ago.
Implying that at one point it did, but that something happened. Now, we've been discussing the star tetrahedron before, and now I want to give you a brief understanding of...
Ooh, the Star of David gets even cooler when you make it 3D, which actually I don't disagree with. That is a pretty cool shape. So, look, I'm not faulting Jordan and New Age stuff for like a fault of like aesthetics. I think they have pretty cool designs, right? It's not really my style, but I get it. So, no shade on that.
The Merkaba. The Merkaba was known...
Butter Skywalker asks, can one unmetal a metal? So basically, if you put metal in a compound that... typically, compounds involving metal do not themselves behave like metal. So for instance, iron oxide doesn't have free-flowing electrons. That's one of the reasons why rusty conductors can be a problem, right? So iron oxide isn't a great example because no one really uses iron conductors, but copper oxide or verdigris, if you have an overly verdigris connector, you can have trouble actually getting an electrical connection across it. When I was in the Navy, actually, we had that problem. We had a salinity detector that there was a leak in, and so salty water was going inside, and it was corroding the copper conductors and creating verdigris, which was limiting the amount of electricity that could actually flow, and was having us read essentially an open. across that circuit. So typically when atoms of metals form compounds with nonmetals, they lose that sort of metallic bond where the electrons get to flow freely. So there you go. That is an example of unmetaling a metal.
In ancient times as the chariot of ascension. It is the star tetrahedral energy field around the body.
Okay, what kind of energy and how do you measure it? What kind of device can I go in to tell if this energy is here? Because the thing is, in physics, right, energy is the ability of a system to do work. It's pretty well defined, and we know certain kinds of energy that exist. There's thermal energy, there's kinetic energy, there's potential energy, there's chemical energy. Which of these is an energy field that surrounds the human body in the shape of two tetrahedra pointed in opposite directions? Because unless you can actually give me an answer to that question, I'm just going to go ahead and say that, nope, this doesn't exist. Now, if you want to spiritualize it, then I'll stop caring, at least for the purposes of this channel, because I don't particularly care about your spiritual beliefs. But if this is a real energy that physically exists, we should be able to measure it. The fact that we haven't means I don't think it's a real thing.
All around the world, there are references to this in ancient texts. When activated to its full potential, the Merkaba.
What is this? This drawing isn't even on, like, it's all slanty and weird? Okay, Jordan, maybe you're not the one with the artistic talent in the New Age realm, because this crazy star tetrahedron looks terrible. Okay, but anyway, I hate this picture so much. I want to reach into it and like shove the top tetrahedron like into a better like edge-on alignment. Ugh, gross.
Which is both a tool and part of your being, can be used to do the impossible, included but...
If it can be used to do the impossible, it wasn't impossible in the first place. That's what impossible means. If it's impossible, you can't use a tool to do it, because then it would just be possible with the tool. It's like saying, oh hey, I can't hammer in nails without a hammer, so hammers let me do the impossible, because it's impossible to hammer in a nail without it. No. If it's impossible to hammer in a nail, then you can't do it even with a hammer. If you can do it with a hammer, then it wasn't impossible. I don't even know.
But not limited to changing dimensions and traveling through the universe.
Okay, so we all have a tool that can let us travel through the universe and between dimensions. Okay? It's funny how we have an extreme lack of people demonstrably doing that, but cool.
Before Mars was destroyed, they built huge tetrahedral pyramids.
No, they didn't. First of all, look, this thing you're showing us isn't even really tetrahedral. And second, those were pictures from Cydonia, which does have some interesting rock shapes. But the thing is, the higher resolution we get on them, the less and less they look like actual like cities and pyramids and stuff. They're just rocks.
They built 3, 4, and 5-sided pyramids, eventually building a complex that was able to build a synthetic...
Nope. Okay, so first, the face isn't a face. Again, just a mesa. The Tholus is just a mound. These are just hills. I get that if you want to draw cool little lines across the features that you think are important in a certain chaotic area on Mars, because this actual terrain, it has a formal name. It's called chaotic terrain, right? Because it's not plains, but it's not really hills. It's got boulders and hills and flat areas just kind of scattered around, right? So that's why it's called chaotic terrain. But yeah, you can go to chaotic terrain in Mars, and if you look hard enough, you're going to find cool-looking patterns. But that's just because humans are good at finding patterns where they don't exist. This is just pareidolia, which is the phenomenon in humans where you perceive patterns that don't exist. It's like why people see faces, and even faces of particular people, in the patterns on their toast. Like, does that toast really look like Jesus? Or are you just primed to see human figures and you think Jesus is important? Yeah, it's probably probably not God Almighty coming down to put a face on your toast. It's probably your brain being a little overactive in pattern seeking. I can't confirm it. Because, maybe God really does like to put faces on toast. But, same thing here. It's probably not that actual ancient Martians built a city made out of just regular rocks that look like regular rocks under higher definition. It's probably just that you're seeing things that aren't really there.
Merkaba. After 1 million years or so, it's been eroded, but the proof is there.
No. Oh. Hold on. I want to see if I can pause on that.
After 1 million years or so, it's been eroded, but the...
Okay, so these things don't actually line up very well with the spiral, for one thing. So, for instance, like at the bottom, so in the top left, where the spiral's starting to come in tighter, like they don't even actually line up. And you've had to use multiple spirals to just pretend that some of these things line up. And if you're willing to just draw spirals willy-nilly, yeah, sure, sometimes a few things are going to kind of roughly line up. But, like, it's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy here, right? So the Texas sharpshooter fallacy goes like this. A guy shoots at the side of a barn, and then goes over to the barn and paints a bullseye around his bullet hole. And then says, look what a great shot I am. It's like, no, you're not a great shot. You were just willing to fit anything onto this until you saw a pattern. It's the same thing that happens with the Bible code, right? If you look into the Bible code stuff, people will try any combination of skipping letters, going backwards, going forwards, going up and down columns, anything. And if you take a large enough text and you're willing to manipulate it in any way you want, yeah, you're going to find quote unquote codes, but not because they were objectively there, just because if you're willing to use any pattern, then yeah, out of the effectively infinite patterns you could choose, some of them are going to have results that look meaningful. But that doesn't mean that you got any usable predictions beforehand. That would be the interesting bit. And yeah, that's just what this is. Like, if we play enough with spirals and squares and whatnot, we can get a few peaks in Cydonia to line up with a few things. Okay, not impressive at all.
Proof is there. Now, because the Martians were severed from the Unity consciousness, they couldn't create a living Merkaba. They simply used it as a tool.
Okay, hold on. If the Merkaba is an energy field in the shape of two tetrahedra, I should say, what does it mean for it to be alive versus not alive but still be a tool? And is it part of you, or did they create an external one and they didn't have their own for some reason, but apparently it was supposed to be part of all life? See, again, this isn't lining up. You're contradicting the earlier rules that you set up, Jordan.
They created a synthetic Merkaba to travel in time and find a new home. A small group of Martians tried to get away from Mars before it was destroyed, and that place they found was Earth.
Okay, again, I like how this isn't identifiable with any actual landmasses on Earth. Jordan, if you think Atlantis is in a place, draw the map that way. I know you won't, because that means you're making a testable prediction, which has already been falsified, because we know what the ocean floor is like, and there's nowhere for Atlantis to be, but oh well.
About 65,000 years in our past, they saw this little vortex sitting there, just pulling in life, with no one in it.
So, originally when he said it was pulling in life, what I kind of thought was that it was attracting these people, like in the previous case, the Hebrews from outer space future. And in this case, it would be attracting the Martians. But now it seems like it's just randomly pulling in bits of life. So, like, are elephants getting sucked into a vortex? Like, what does it actually mean in this case for the vortex to be attracting life? What does that look like? What kinds of life are attracted to it? And apparently, because the Lemurians and the Hebrews aren't currently being attracted to this one, because they haven't mastered that energy, apparently, what life has mastered that energy to be attracted to the other vortex? I don't know. Jordan hasn't told us.
They didn't ask permission. Being part of the Lucifer experiment, they just said, all right, let's do it.
I mean, you didn't say that the Hebrews had asked permission either, so I'm not sure why this is different, but okay.
And they stepped onto that vortex, and in doing so, They joined and changed our evolutionary path.
I gotta say, actually, I do like that camera movement where, like, we get the sort of parallax and then we zoom in on this rather sinister-looking Martian dude. Jordan has very uneven artistic abilities, from what I can tell. Sometimes it's terrible. Sometimes, like right here, it's actually pretty good. I think it's his animation that he's pretty good at, and the drawing part he's just kind of okay-ish at.
Thoth's father, Thome, was one of the Nakals who set up Atlantis on the island of Udal.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and guess that this is, again, from the channeled stuff from Melchizedek, whatever his first name is, pretending to be Thoth, or Thoth. I don't know. I call it Thoth. I don't think it's wrong to call it Thoth. As we had someone point out earlier, the Greek uses an omega, so even if you're using the Greek reconstructed pronunciation, it would be Thoth. Whatever. I'm not going to hit anyone on that one.
That island, the top of the Tree of Life, was the brain of Atlantis.
What does it mean for an island to be the brain of a continent? Is that where all the leaders lived? Maybe that's what he's showing us. Maybe this is supposed to be the capital city of Atlantis, on an island off the coast of the mainland. If that's the case, then I retract any kind of criticism based on that. But if that isn't the case, then I want to know what the heck it means for an island to be the brain of a nearby continent.
And on it was a small city called Poseidon. This...
Okay, the city was called Poseidon, sure. And of course, based on the ring structure, he's going to compare this. I haven't actually seen this, but based on the ring structure, I think he's going to compare this city to the stories of Atlantis from Socrates, which, by the way, most contemporaries and, subsequent authors writing about Plato's dialogues thought that the Atlantis story was just something that Plato wrote up, or made up, put into the mouth of Socrates as an example. So, most writers, even in antiquity, thought that the story of Atlantis was fiction in the strict sense. Like, it was made up and not to trick you. You were never supposed to believe it in the first place.
City is what Plato was discussing when he said that Poseidon bore 10 children, the 10 circles on the Tree of Life. Poseidon was made of 3 rings painted in black, red, and white stones, and it was...
So yeah, he is in fact doing that. So, if he says that this is the capital city, that Poseidon is the capital of Atlantis, then maybe I'll grant this whole thing. Now, I do think it's interesting, though, that it's given a name in ancient Greek when ancient Greek as a language wouldn't be spoken for a few thousand years. Curious, but okay.
The symbol for Atlantis. The inner circle represented the Nakals. The middle circle were the priesthood, called the Maya, and the outer circle represented the regular people of Atlantis.
So Mayans are somehow on a higher level than everyone else? Is that what we're going to go with? Because, I mean, I feel like a civilization based primarily on robbing other people in the surrounding countryside in order to get their goods and sacrificial victims for your human sacrifices isn't the most enlightened way to run a society. And while I'm not here to defend the actions of Spanish colonialists, it's not exactly like the Mayans they conquered were exactly the height of civilizational nicety and spiritual purity. I mean, they were literally ripping out people's hearts for fear that if they didn't, the rain might not fall. Like, I can see why you thought that the ancient Tibetans were, or not the ancient Tibetans, but like Tibetan Buddhist monks were the heights of spirituality, but I'm not getting it for the Mayans, man. You're gonna have to explain that, Jordan.
We'll come back to this down the road.
Of course.
There were only a few thousand Martians who came to Earth.
We'll come back to this. That basically means we're not going to get to it, at least not today. I might do another one of these another time, because I'm having fun with it. But we'll see.
Earth through the synthetic Merkaba. The first thing they did when they arrived in Atlantis was try to take over the continent. They tried to declare war and invade.
Okay, but these were supposed to be cold, emotionless, logical people, right? And you have them depicted as a tiny minority surrounded by people. Why would that be the good option? And you already said only a tiny fraction of Martians ever managed to make it off of Mars and into Atlantis before Mars died. So it's not like they have the full force of Mars behind them. I don't get it.
However, they were vulnerable due to their small numbers compared to the millions of Atlanteans, and we finally subdued them. We were able to stop them from conquering us, but we could not send them back.
So again, why did the Martians do that when the odds were so heavily stacked against them? Were they cold, emotionless, calculating entities? Or were they angry, greedy conquerors? Because those two things don't line up.
When this happened on our evolutionary path, we now had the planetary consciousness of a 14-year-old girl.
Okay, every time he says something like that, I get a really creepy vibe. I don't know if it's fair, but it's true. It just creeps me out a little bit. Jordan, please stop talking about underage girls as the planetary mind. Just don't. I really wish he had a better metaphor for this. But since I don't even know what it's supposed to mean, I guess it's too much to expect.
The Martians were an incredibly male species, and also very old. So what you had was the...
Oh, is he... He's about to talk about old men and young girls. This is... Okay, I don't know if I'm ready for this. We're gonna see what happens. Hopefully it's not as bad as I think it's gonna be. Okay. Here we go.
14-year-old girl being taken over by a 60 or 70-year-old man.
Yeah, no, that was about as bad as I thought it would be. Thanks, Jordan. Damn it. You didn't have to do that, Jordan. But, okay, I'm gonna try and push through a little bit more of this, because, my goodness.
We had no choice in the matter. The Martians just stepped in and said, like it or not, we're here. They didn't care what we thought or felt about it. Really, it was no different from what the settlers of North America did to the Native Americans.
Well, except you just said that the humans, or the Earthlings, or whatever we're going with, subdued them, which does make it different from what the European settlers did to Native Americans, in that the Native Americans never successfully pushed back the Europeans and conquered them and subdued them, so it is a little bit different. But, oh my goodness.
Once the initial conflict was over, it was agreed that the Martians would try and understand this female thing they lacked. This emotional feeling, which they had none of at all.
I like how he has no feeling, but he's visibly angry and confused. Jordan, I don't think you'll ever watch this, but if you ever do, there's a thing I want you to remember for the future. It's that anger is an emotion. Yeah, I know, weird, right? Yeah, anger is an emotion. You don't get to have angry people who are emotionless. Right? I'll tell you what, it might help if you watch a few episodes of Star Trek. Watch a few episodes of Star Trek, and pay attention to Mr. Spock's character. Right? Because that's what happens when someone who isn't a complete moron tries to make a character with no emotions. And you know what Spock doesn't do a whole lot of? Flying into blind rages. Now granted, don't watch Star Trek Into Darkness. That movie doesn't count for the purposes I'm discussing here. The original series, pay attention to Spock.
Things more or less settled for a while, but the Martians slowly began to implement their left-brain technologies, which the Atlanteans knew nothing about. One after the other, the Martians kept putting up...
Okay, so rope, clocks, and scuba diving are all male technologies, everybody. So, apparently, I don't even know what that means. What does it mean for scuba diving to be masculine? I guess not scuba diving, snorkeling, to be fair. Snorkels. Snorkels are masculine, everybody. Okay, sure.
These left brain inventions until the Atlanteans slowly began to see things through their left brain. We slowly began to become a male species.
Now, that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of okay with going back and forth between men, male, and masculine here, because Jordan does that. Like, is it a male species or is it a masculine species? Because those aren't the same thing. But Jordan just conflates the term. So, at least in terms of what he's talking about, I don't feel too bad about doing the same to him.
The Martians gained control, bit by bit, until eventually they had all of the power, as was their intention.
Okay, so why didn't they just start off with this insidious strategy in the first place? You know, the cold, emotionless guys? Yeah, that would have worked, apparently. So these cold, emotionless, but genius-level intellects just went the stupid way because they were angry. Okay.
The animosity between Atlanteans and the Martians never subsided, not even till the end of Atlantis. They hated each other. The Atlanteans were shoved down and treated like inferior.
Okay, also, hatred? That's an emotion, Jordan. You can't be emotionless and purely logical if you hate someone.
It was like a marriage that the female component didn't like, but the male component didn't really care if she liked it or not. It remained this way for a
That's when you get a divorce. So it wasn't like a marriage, was it?
very long time, until about 26,000 years ago, when the next phase slowly began. Before we
The next phase of what? Human history, I guess, maybe? I don't know.
continue, we have to talk about polar shifts. See, in the 1930s, Edgar Cayce was channeling information for
Oh my goodness, Edgar Cayce. So Edgar Cayce is one of those famous channelers from history, right? And here's the thing. He made a lot of various predictions and prophecies and whatnot. And you know what? They didn't work. They didn't come true. Smitty asks if it's too late for Jordan to introduce aquatic ape theory. I don't know. We might get there. Yeah. So yeah, Edgar Cayce, again, is one of those completely worthless sources. Meaningless. His predictions didn't come true, so we can safely ignore him. But let's see what Edgar Cayce had to say about this.
geologist when he stopped and he said, "There's something you should know. In the near future, the Earth's poles are going to shift." Cayce was a brilliant man with a very strong connection to higher dimensions.
No, Cayce was a grifter with very high connections to getting people to believe him for his own advantage. And very soon isn't a very, specific prediction, but I would say that given that we're, pretty far away from Edgar Cayce, and he said pretty soon there's going to be a pole shift, and there hasn't been, that prediction was wrong.
Where he communicated with other beings for the human race. Ultimately, it was because of his channelings that the belief system called New Age was created. This is again just putting what he was doing into boxes of understanding, because no one else understood what he was doing at that time.
Or it's because humans have to use words to refer to things, right? Like, I get it. Reality isn't as nice as the little boxes that humans like to put things into. But if you don't let humans put things into boxes, they literally can't refer to them. And I think everyone knows that things are a little bit fuzzy, right? Like, oh, we put Christianity and it says Hebrew, we'll go with Judaism, in two little boxes, right? Okay, well, there are also Messianic Jews who consider themselves to be Jewish, who practice, following all the various Jewish dietary rules and keeping kosher and all the various commandments, but who also believe that Jesus is the Son of God and the Messiah. They're in a fuzzy in-between area in those boxes. That's great. Okay, everyone recognizes that these boxes don't really always reflect life on the ground. But we have to be able to talk about things. And so this idea of, the coming age of... Actually, the New Age ultimately derives from, the coming age of Aquarius, which, by the way, there's no formal definition for, so by some definitions it's already begun. Under some definitions it won't begun for another 100-ish years or whatever. Who cares? But yeah, that's what it ultimately refers back to. But yeah, Edward Cayce was a big part of the foundational part of this, looking at astrology and pretend ancient history to come up with some spiritual themes that are supposed to subsume all of the world's traditional religions like Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism and whatnot. Great.
Nevertheless, when Cayce talked, people listened. Geologists began exploring the possibility of a polar shift, and they found something remarkable. A string of major pieces of evidence came forth and lent tremendous weight to what Casey was saying, and they have now changed the world's view on the subject.
But Casey's prediction was wrong. It didn't come true. And I'm actually not convinced, and I would need to actually see some evidence of this, that the actual course of events was Casey predicts that pole shifts will happen, then geologists find evidence of pole shifts in the past at the mid-Atlantic ridge. Because I'm going to be honest, Jordan, given how little sense you've made, I don't believe that order of events is actually what happened. I actually strongly suspect that geologists started finding magnetic banding at the mid-Atlantic ridge, and then Casey came up with ideas. Maybe I'm wrong, though.
Scientists believe that if there was going to be a physical pole shift, there would also be a change in the magnetic poles. Through studying lab...
Okay, so hold on. The pole shift that he's talking about isn't a change in the magnetic poles? So those are two related but not identical events? Then what pole is shifting? This is the thing that frustrates me about Jordan, is I will think I know what he's talking about sometimes, but then he will say something that takes the not completely bonkers idea that I thought he was going with, and it's like, no, you thought that I was having a coherent idea? Wrong. Nope, wasn't a coherent idea. How dare you think that I have coherent ideas? That's basically how I feel like Jordan is communicating. It's like he wants people to not take him seriously.
Beds, geologists were able to see where the planetary magnetics were when the lava beds hardened at certain depths.
I don't know what those arrows pointing to the right were for, but whatever.
They found that the earlier magnetic poles were not where they were now, but in Hawaii. The last...
No, I'm not aware of anything like that. It typically flips so that the north and south poles typically are still far to the north and south, but their directionality will flip so that, at certain points in the Earth's history, the magnetic north will be towards the South Pole, and then it will be towards the North Pole, and the exact location will shift around, but it still stays very close to the poles on a global scale. It's never in the tropics. So, I guess that's what you were trying to display with that right-facing series of arrows. But yeah, no, that's not a real thing as far as I know.
shift that took place was 13,000 years ago, and we will get there in the story soon. They did another test and found that it had shifted again 26,000 years ago as well.
Jordan, this is where you put citations on screen, or at least in the description. Now, I'll grant you, maybe he does have citations in the description, and I don't have them in hand. But I didn't notice any citations anywhere on Jordan's videos, and I've clicked on his descriptions, and he doesn't typically put citations in. Now, granted, I'm not the best at posting all of my citations, but if I have significant things that I think might be contentious, I tend to cite them, and some of my videos have quite a few citations. And something this contentious, I would feel obligated to cite.
Scientists also learned that polar shifts happen very quickly. In a single
No, that's broadly true. They do seem to happen pretty quickly.
day, the magnetics would do a complete flip.
I don't think there's evidence that we could get it down to a single day, but on a geological scale, they are extremely rapid. But that could mean anything from a single day to like a few hundred years or even to a few thousand years. So,
Or turn 90 degrees.
Again, as far as I know, there has never been a case of the magnetic field going 90 degrees. Now, part of that is just that it's made up because of the spinning and movement of Earth's core, which rotates around about the same axis as the Earth's crust. So it doesn't seem possible on that basis to get the magnetic field to come out at a right angle to that axis of rotation.
That number again. And within 24 hours, the sun would be rising differently than it did the previous day.
What? Hold on. No. What he meant by a polar shift is the Earth turns backwards? Jordan, do you know how much momentum there is in the Earth and its motion? You would be flinging everything on Earth off of it if you tried to reverse the rotation of Earth in a day. What? No. know what kind of energy could possibly even do that from a physical standpoint. You would have to slow the Earth down and then make it start going the other way. That kind of energy would just melt the planet in the first place. That is not what polar shifts are. I did not see that one coming. That was a surprise to me. Once again, I thought Jordan was being stupid, but I did not realize just how stupid he could be. This one is breaking me, guys. I don't even know what is happening. Holy crap, this is stupid. Ben says DFOTY candidate. Well, the problem with that is that this video is from a few years ago. So, DFOTY per the rules, and of course the rules for DFOTY are very important. But technically, per the rules, we can't nominate people for things they didn't do this year. Or in the previous calendar year or whatever, right? But, oh my goodness. Okay, I'm gonna try and go ahead again. Because, that was dumb.
This shift has happened hundreds of times over the last 100 million years on Earth, but...
No, Jordan. The kind of shift you're talking about hasn't. And now he's having the Earth flip upside down, which I guess is slightly less stupid than it having reversed, but not by a lot. It's just ever so slightly less completely catastrophic to everything. I mean, it still would kill everything, and there's still absolutely no way to get that much energy onto Earth without a dramatic impact. And certainly not going to arrive from internal processes. But yeah, okay, sure.
But it's speeding up now and happening faster and faster. Now only 13,000 years between each shift. A whole new viewpoint is beginning to be understood. From space, would this not appear as a pulse? Now, there's...
What do you mean, would it not appear as a pulse? Like, to whom? In what way? I guess, like, Earth's magnetic field doesn't just, like, shoot out into infinity. I mean, it's swamped by the sun's magnetic field at large distances. So, I guess maybe if you were in, like, low Earth orbit, you could see it as a pulse if you had electronics, I guess, maybe... And I guess that counts as space, but from like even a solar system scale, no, it wouldn't appear as anything.
There's a lot more to talk about with polar shifts, but I'm going to give you the basics. A scientist named Charles Hapgood was studying this at great detail because the leading theory behind what caused polar shifts was still underdeveloped at the time. He came up with a...
Ugly German Truth says, well, as bad as Jordan is, at least he's not flat Earth. Honestly... I don't actually think this is a whole lot better than flat Earth. The idea that the entire Earth is going to flip upside down isn't that much less crazy than anything a flat earther has ever said. So, I don't know, man. I don't know.
A theory that demonstrated to be possible through various experiments. Through these experiments, they learned that the surface of the Earth, the crust, could slip over the main mass of the Earth, which contains...
Dude, if that happened, it would kill virtually everything. Okay. Look, the interface between the mantle and the crust isn't like an oil slick or something, right? It's just continuous rock that gets more and more viscous as you go down. There isn't a hard break between the crust and the mantle. So if this happened, it would cause enormous amounts of friction. And if you think that the heat problem for young Earth creationism with their catastrophic plate tectonics or hydroplate theory is disastrous, and we're talking about multiple hundreds of atomic bombs per square meter per day kinds of catastrophic for creationism, this is on at least the same level. This would melt the entire planet, vaporize the oceans, and turn the gases of the atmosphere into a plasma. This is not the kind of thing that humans could live through.
Continues its rotation as if nothing happened. The crust would rotate and spin out of control until eventually it settles again in a new location aligned with the new magnetics. Even
if that didn't melt the planet, it would throw everyone into the air. Except, I guess, the people who are right at the axis, in which case it would just make them dizzy. Probably, like, seriously dizzy to the point that I don't know if they would even survive that. But anyway, things would get flown into the air, things would crash, mountains would come tumbling down. Like, momentum is a thing, guys. Like, I mean, I know my audience knows that, but apparently Jordan's doesn't. Or at least Jordan himself doesn't know that momentum is a thing. You can't just, even if you ignore the heat, you can't just get the entire crust of the planet swinging around wildly and not expect that to be completely catastrophic to everything. This is definitely dumber than anything Matt Powell has said. This is dumber than the air in space. This is amazing. I honestly didn't think it was going to be quite this bad when I decided to do this, because I just found a compilation of this series, and I downloaded it, and I was just like, we're going to just go. And my goodness, is this is... I don't even have words. We're just going to keep going for a little bit.
During this time, there are massive earthquakes and tsunamis and devastations that rock the world.
Jordan, yeah, there would be all of those things, but they would be so bad that there would be no coming back from it. Tsunamis would basically cover everything. All the mountains would come crumbling down. No one would survive. Everyone would be lifted off the ground and flown into the air and then drop down and die. Every disaster movie you've ever seen doesn't hold a candle to what would happen if the Earth's crust just started slipping around.
Doesn't that sound a bit like the destruction described in the Book of Revelations? Now, I don't want to freak anyone...
No, it doesn't sound like what's described in the Book of Revelations. Because the Book of Revelations describes wars and famines, but not the entire planet melting and everyone getting thrown miles up into the air. No. This sounds orders of magnitude worse than anything that's in the Book of Revelation. Jordan, have you ever read the Book of Revelation? Like... Oh my goodness. Okay, here we go.
Out. Besides Edgar Casey's account, many other ancient prophecies, including Nostradamus and Mayan prophecies, have talked about polar shifts in one way or another.
No, they haven't. Okay, look, the Mayan prophecy thing, I don't know when this was made. Maybe it was made before 2012. There was no Mayan prophecy about the 13th Baktun, which is what happened on December 12th, or was it? December, whatever it was. 21st, 2012, that's what it was. Sorry. My brain is a little scrambled after this. At most, the Mayans were like, hey, cool, we lasted longer than the previous world if we get to this point. That's it. There was no prophecy that they were going to last only just as long as the previous world had. Nothing like that, because the previous world had lasted 12, or had ended on the 13th Baktun or something like that. There is no Mayan prophecy about pole shifts. It's not even clear that they would have known what a pole shift would be, at least in the magnetic sense. And just, yeah, no, none of this is actually evidenced in ancient texts. Although I guess you can't call Mayan text ancient. Whatever, I don't care. We're going to hit play, and I'm almost done for the day. Basically, I'm just going to go until I run out of beverage to keep my mouth or throat or whatever from being too sore from all this talking, and then we're just going to sign off. So.
And modern science is becoming increasingly aware that there is going to be a polar shift in our near future, which is...
I mean, maybe a magnetic pole shift, but I guarantee you science is not predicting that the Earth's crust is going to come free from the mantle and just wobble about.
Lining up with our consciousness shift, though they don't take that aspect into account.
Yeah, because a consciousness shift isn't a thing that you can reliably define, Jordan. It's not a real thing. It's just made-up nonsense. And I know that apparently it's connected to, like, ideas about nirvana, but nirvana isn't a higher aspect of consciousness. It's more of a release from consciousness in the first place.
It's funny, actually. A while back, Nova did 2 reports on polar shifts, and both times NASA shut them down.
No, I don't believe you that NASA shut them down, because magnetic field reversals are real things, and NASA doesn't deny it, and NASA doesn't have the power to shut things down. What is even happening? NASA can't censor you. They aren't a law enforcement agency. Okay.
Then recently, Nova released a new video called Earth's Magnetic Storm. That video shows all of the evidence.
Is it called Earth's Magnetic Storm, or is it called Earth's Invisible Shield, Jordan? If you're gonna lie about the video, don't show the title on screen when you're lying about the title. This actually happens every once in a while with young Earth creationists. Well, they'll put up the refutation of their own statement on screen while they're saying it. I don't get how you can do that. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
For pole shifts without actually using the words pole shift. It's almost as if a specific company doesn't want us knowing about this.
NASA isn't a company. It's a government agency. Guys, if I don't recover, it's been wonderful having you as my audience. I might go and die because my brain might be melting. So, wish me luck.
And the evidence that's been brought forth. Polar shifts are directly related to the magnetics of the planet as well. Planetary
Yeah, because the only kind of, quote, polar shift that anyone has ever been able to demonstrate is magnetic field reversals. So of course they're intrinsically linked to the magnetic field, because it's the only thing they're about.
magnetics are supposed to look like this, but the reality is much different. Our magnetic...
No, it's not supposed to look like that, Jordan. That's an idealized version of the magnetic field. And then what you show later is taking into account the actual magnetic field, in that the Earth has a more complicated magnetic field than just the perfect torus that people like to generalize it as. Now, on average, it comes out to be pretty close to that generalized torus. But it's not actually perfect, because the Earth is complicated.
magnetics have been weakening over the last 500 years or so.
That's broadly true, yeah. Since we've been able to measure it, and even going back historically using things like, magnetized parts of pottery and seafloor and stuff, yeah, the strength of the magnetic field has been declining for a while now. Yeah, I do also think my brain might have just tried to crawl out of my ear. This whole thing is just so many levels of dumb, and every time I think I've reached the bottom of just the pile of dumb, it turns out that, nope, it's supported by a whole pillar of dumb.
And today, they look a little more like this.
Jordan, you're just showing magnetic... First of all, that's no longer where the poles are, because this video is old. But you're just showing a fairly generalized toroidal field, magnetic lines of force, going along the Earth, but you're using Mercator projection, so of course they're distorted. That's not a real globe you're showing. Apparently, map projections are a thing that baffles Jordan.
It was the magnetics becoming more and more warped that's causing many of the problems we've seen in the last 20 years. Birds follow the magnetics of the planet to migrate, and they'd be ending up in places they shouldn't be.
No, Jordan. There has not been a general trend towards birds getting lost. There's been a trend towards birds spending more time in their their winter locations than their summer because of global warming. You don't get lost because the magnetic field is getting a little bit weaker. You would get lost if it actually changed around, and there has been some movement in the magnetic poles. But yeah, none of this adds up.
Whales were continually beaching themselves in the 90s because they followed these magnetics, which led...
Actually, we don't have great evidence that whales follow magnetics. However, we do know that whales tend to beach themselves more often in areas where things like various world navies are using active sonar, because whales can hear that, and it confuses them.
Led them to land where there should have been water. As for humans, you know how on the night of the full moon there are more rapes, murders, and violent crimes than any other night of the lunar cycle?
No, there aren't. People have checked. For years now, people have checked. There's no actual statistical correlation between higher rates of violent crime and full moons. It's just not true. All right, you know what? I'm going to let him finish this sentence, and then I'm probably going to respond to that and then get out of here.
Well, the moon affects the magnetics of the Earth, slightly.
How, Jordan? And how does it that when it happens to have more light falling on it, that it affects the magnetics of the Earth differently than when it has less light falling on it that gets to Earth? That doesn't... That there's not even an apparent causal link that I can even imagine between those things. Now, if you were to say that, you know, when the moon is at apogee, it affects things versus when it's at perigee, then maybe you would actually have some way of saying that the interaction between the moon and Earth's magnetic fields could have some effect that could be felt on Earth. But that's not what you said. You said full moon versus presumably versus new moon, which has nothing to do with the distance between the Earth and the moon. It has nothing to do with, you know, anything that could affect the magnetic field. It's just how much light is falling back on us, because it's the relationship between the Earth and the moon and the sun. But local to Earth, the Earth's magnetic field predominates by far over the sun's. So that relationship shouldn't matter. So you have to come up with something that's just between the Earth and the moon, and the phase of the moon isn't going to be that. Like I said, it could be apogee versus perigee for the moon, but Jordan didn't go there. Instead, he went the stupid route. It's already stupid to think that it would actually have any significant effect between perigee and apogee, since they're not very significant in terms of like the Earth-Moon system. Like it has very little effect even on tides, which are the primary way that the Earth-Moon system interact. But yeah, no, Jordan had to go with the stupidest version of the Earth affecting magnetic fields on Earth. So, this is just so many layers of complete nonsense, guys. But thank you for sticking with me. I'll tell you what, if you guys want more of this, if you guys liked me melting my own brain by watching and reacting to Jordan's history of humanity, let me know. I'll put it in the comments. And if you like it, I'll do it again on some Saturday where I don't have anything else lined up. As far as the channel goes, Tuesday is going to be another Kent with Bent. Then the Tuesday after that should be an Eric with Erica. Thursday, look for the next Spirit Science Aliens video. And I'm hoping the Thursday after that to have the next Speculative Evolution video out. I'm also going to be working on a video about some basic topics in linguistics upon request. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Oh, no, next Saturday, I'm going to be interviewing the Venerable Bede on Saturday. So there's going to be a stream on Saturday with the Venerable Bede. We're setting that up. So thank you, the Venerable Bede. If you've been around, if you've been around this channel, you probably would recognize that guy. He's a big history guy. So there you go. I think that's basically it. Thank you again for showing up, guys, on this essentially unplanned stream. I also want to give a very special thank you to Quinn for becoming a new member. Also, Carrie Bronson, Vandalia 1998, and Thrawn Mulus for their super chats. You guys, your support really does help. Every little bit really adds up. So thank you very much. And I will see you guys later. I want to take a little